At exactly 11:08 p.m., inside a silent Florida park where the wind carries every sound a little too clearly, an 18-year-old young woman sits alone in her car, unaware that the next few minutes will change everything. Her phone screen glows softly across her face. A message. A name she recognizes. Someone she once trusted enough to meet this late. She looks out the window. The park is empty. Too empty. The kind of quiet that feels staged, intentional. Her name is Kaylin Fiengo, warm-hearted, hopeful, and standing at the beginning of a new chapter she never got the chance to finish. Tonight she isn't thinking about fear. She's thinking about clarity. About doing the right thing. About finding a way forward. She believes she's here to talk. To explain. To be heard. But as another message lights up her screen, the camera outside her car catches something else entirely. A figure steps out from behind the tree line. Not rushing. Not hesitating. Just watching. Kaylin doesn't see him yet. He stands still, the glow of a distant street lamp outlining his silhouette, a shape she would recognize but not like this. Not this quiet. Not this late. Not this close. The night grows heavier. Her breathing slows. Her fingers tighten around her phone. Something about the stillness of the park shifts, as if the air itself is bracing for the moment that's about to arrive. She believed she was meeting someone who cared about her future. She had no idea she was stepping into a moment she wouldn't walk away from. Because this meeting, this conversation she thought would bring clarity, is about to reveal hidden messages, secret intentions, and a motive rooted far deeper than conflict. A motive rooted in control. And as the shadow begins moving toward her car, slow, deliberate, unhurried, the truth is simple. Kaylin wasn't supposed to be in danger. Not here. Not tonight. But danger doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it approaches quietly. Today we dive into the case of Donovan L. Faison, the murder of Kaylin Fiengo. Long before the quiet Florida park, long before the messages, long before the world learned her name in the worst possible way, Kaylin Fiengo was simply a young woman full of possibility. To understand what was taken from her and what the world lost, we have to go back to where her story truly began. Not in the darkness of that November night, but in the soft, ordinary moments that made her life matter. Moments filled with laughter, warmth, family, and the kind of youthful hope that feels almost untouchable. Kaylin was born in Florida, in a small community where people still waved at their neighbors and where families gathered at the same local parks for years. She grew up surrounded by sunlight, open spaces, and the kind of childhood that leaves behind a trail of vivid, comforting memories. What people remember most about her earliest years isn't a specific event, it's her energy. Bright, gentle, overflowing with kindness. She wasn't loud, but she wasn't quiet either. She lived in that perfect in-between space where she could make anyone feel comfortable. Family often said that being around her felt easy, like you could breathe a little deeper, relax a little more, talk a little longer. She had this innate ability to light up a room without ever trying. From the start, she carried a softness that made people protective of her. Not because she was fragile, far from it, but because she made others feel seen, valued, and cared for. She had a warmth that made people want to protect her in return. Growing up, she was close with her family. She was the kind of daughter who checked in without being asked, who listened more than she spoke, who cared deeply even when she didn't know how to show it fully. To her parents, she wasn't just their child. She was a bright spot in their everyday routine. A reason to smile after a hard day. A reminder that goodness still existed. Her childhood was filled with little things, the real kind of memories that matter. She loved music. She loved spending time outdoors. She loved being around people who made her feel safe. And she loved days that felt simple. Days with family dinners, school events, small milestones, and the comfort of familiarity. As she entered her teenage years, her personality blossomed even more. She wasn't someone who craved attention, but people were naturally drawn to her. Friends described her as the safest person to talk to. Someone you could confide in without judgment. Someone who understood that life wasn't always easy, but who believed that kindness still mattered. She had a smile that made other people relax, and a way of laughing that seemed to pull everyone else along with it. Kaylin was compassionate to a fault. She wanted to help people. She wanted to support them. She wanted to be there in ways she sometimes struggled to be for herself. That's the thing about people with soft hearts. They pour into the world without ever thinking about how little they receive back. Her friends would later say that Kaylin had dreams that felt bigger than the reality she lived in. She wanted independence. She wanted stability. She wanted to build something meaningful. She talked about moving forward, about shaping her own life, about becoming the kind of adult she could be proud of. At 18, she was standing right at the edge of that transition, the emotional doorway between childhood and adulthood. It's a stage filled with uncertainty, excitement, and endless possibility. And Kaylin felt all of it. She had goals. True goals. Not the abstract dreams of a young teenager, but the genuine, grounded ambitions of a young woman finally stepping into her own. She talked about finding her path, maybe in school, maybe in a career, maybe in something she hadn't discovered yet. She wasn't in a rush, but she was eager. Eager to grow. Eager to change. Eager to become the woman she knew she could be. What made her unique wasn't her circumstances. It was her spirit. She believed in second chances. She believed people could grow. She believed life could be complicated and still beautiful. Her loved ones remember the way she approached life with both caution and hope. She knew challenges existed. She wasn't naive. She simply refused to let hardship define her. She had this quiet resilience, a determination that grew stronger even when life tried to dim it. And then, something happened that shifted the direction of her future. A moment that many young women experience but few expect so early. A moment that changed the rhythm of her life, but didn't take away her hope. Kaylin found out she was expecting. She wasn't afraid of the idea of motherhood. She was young, yes, but she also carried maturity in her heart that made the idea feel less frightening and more grounding. She wanted to step up. She wanted to be responsible. She wanted to give love in a way she felt deeply capable of. To her, this wasn't a burden, it was a beginning. She spoke about the future with quiet excitement. She knew there would be challenges, but she wasn't running from them. She had always been someone who faced life head-on, even when things felt uncertain. Her loved ones later shared that she had begun imagining what her life would look like. The softer mornings, the new routines, the small joys she would build from scratch. She talked about wanting to do things right. About wanting to create something stable and loving. About wanting to give this child a life filled with the same warmth she grew up with. The idea of becoming a mother didn't scare her. It grounded her. It gave her purpose. It made her feel like her life was expanding rather than shrinking. She confided in people she trusted. She tried to bridge conversations she hoped would bring clarity, security, and peace. She believed in honesty. She believed the truth mattered. She believed people could work together for the sake of something bigger. But the beauty of Kaylin's heart, the softness, the hope, the desire to create something meaningful, is also what made her vulnerable. Because while she approached the future with openness, not everyone around her did. There were conversations that turned tense. Voices that didn't match her optimism. Moments where she felt more alone than she wanted to admit. But even then, she tried. She tried to communicate. She tried to understand. She tried to create a bridge where others saw only a wall. Her last weeks were filled with the kind of emotional balancing act that many young women know all too well, wanting to protect her peace while also trying to respect the people involved. She wasn't perfect, but she cared deeply. Too deeply at times. Kaylin was still moving forward. Still hopeful. Still determined to do the right thing. Her friends say she wasn't blind to the tension growing around her. She simply believed it could be resolved. She believed that honesty and communication would eventually lead to something stable. Something peaceful. She believed people would show up the way she did. She believed compassion could outweigh fear. She believed the world was still kind. And that belief, that gentle, optimistic belief, is what makes her story so devastating. Because Kaylin's life wasn't defined by the tragedy that took her away. It was defined by compassion. By innocence. By warmth. By dreams. By the kind of youthful hope that leaves a mark long after someone is gone. To understand the weight of her story, you must understand this. Kaylin was not a statistic. She was not a headline. She was not the moment the world later fixated on. She was a daughter. A friend. A young woman with plans. A young woman with a beating, hopeful heart. And she was trying, truly trying, to take her first steps into adulthood with grace, courage, and love. What happened to her wasn't just a tragedy, it was a theft. The theft of a future she was ready to build. The theft of a life filled with promise. The theft of a child she was prepared to welcome with open arms. And somewhere, as she was shaping her plans and imagining her future, a tension she couldn't fully see was quietly tightening around her. She didn't know it yet, couldn't have known, but the decisions she made out of hope would collide with someone else's decisions made out of fear. And that collision would lead her toward a moment she never deserved. But Kaylin's story must always begin here, not with the ending but with the life she lived. A life filled with love, warmth, hope, and the kind of goodness that lingers long after someone is gone. To understand the emotional collision that led to that fateful night in a quiet Florida park, we must first understand the relationship between Kaylin Fiengo and Donovan L. Faison. Its beginnings, its shifting tone, and the moments that quietly pulled them apart even as Kaylin hoped they could build something lasting. Their story didn't begin with violence or despair or fear. It began with something ordinary: connection. Kaylin and Donovan met in a time of youthful uncertainty, when life still felt like it had endless directions, and every relationship carried the promise of growth, stability, and belonging. At first, their interactions were like those of many young couples. Moments of laughter, conversation, shared plans, and the simple warmth of feeling understood by someone else. Friends and family later described their early conversations as light but real, not swept up in fantasy, but grounded in a genuine desire to know one another. They spoke like two young adults exploring a connection that felt special to both of them, even if it was still unfolding. There were talks about future possibilities, easy jokes traded back and forth, shared memories that started small and felt significant in the moment. For Kaylin, there was something about Donovan that felt familiar, comforting, and stable in a way few people had been in her life. His presence brought her a sense of companionship, a reassurance that someone was willing to be part of her story. She wasn't naive, she knew life could be complicated, but Donovan felt like someone who could walk beside her through that complexity. But beneath the surface of shared laughter and everyday conversation, there were quieter moments that introduced tension. Gentle at first, barely noticeable, but subtle shifts nonetheless. In private, their dynamic wasn't always as light as it was in public. Quiet frustrations, tension in tone. Moments where empathy faltered before it could fully form. Kaylin, with her gentle heart and open intentions, often reached for understanding. She tried to listen. She tried to give patience when it seemed hard-earned. Yet in the moments that mattered most, the emotional space between them grew wider, not in explosive arguments, but in silence that weighed heavier each time it settled. Then came the moment that marked a turning point, a moment of truth brimming with hope and fear at once. Kaylin discovered she was pregnant. She didn't hold back. She trusted Donovan enough to share this life-altering news. She sent him a photo, not just of a positive test, but of herself stepping toward a future she believed she could find peace in. It wasn't just information she was sharing. It was hope she was offering, for partnership, for shared responsibility, for unity in the face of change. His response shocked everyone who would later hear about it. In documented text exchanges presented at trial, Kaylin revealed her pregnancy to Donovan by sending a photo of 2 positive pregnancy tests. According to prosecutors, he responded with a single, stark message: abortion, expressing anger, disbelief, and rejection. Friends later testified that the reaction stunned Kaylin, not only emotionally but in how it contradicted the connection they had built. She had opened her heart. He responded with words that felt like dismissal. Behind that message lay a deeper conflict that was not visible to the casual observer. Prosecutors argued that Donovan felt intense pressure and anger because of his personal situation, specifically that he was living with another woman at the time who suspected him of infidelity. That suspicion, the argument went, contributed to his reaction, fueling a volatile mix of fear, anger, and denial. In texts later shown to jurors, Donovan expressed his frustration to a friend in language that revealed emotional turmoil and troubling intent. According to court evidence, he wrote, "On my brother's grave, I'm gonna crop her out." A chilling phrase prosecutors said reflected his state of mind. Imagine what those words must have sounded like in Kaylin's heart. Not just confusion but disbelief. Not anger, but abandonment. For someone who had tried to build a bridge of honesty, this was a rupture, a crack that widened into an unspoken chasm. And yet Kaylin continued to hope for resolution. Friends who spoke with her in the final days said she believed meeting Donovan in person might bring clarity, reassurance, and mutual respect. She was hopeful that conversation could restore balance, and that calm could be found even after tension. She didn't approach him with fear, she approached him with honesty. But there were signs, small yet present, that all was not well beneath the surface. Friends expressed concerns about how volatile Donovan's reactions could be. They noticed moments when he seemed quick to anger, hesitant to listen, and unusually sensitive to conflict. Family members subtly worried, not out of judgment, but out of instinctive concern for Kaylin's emotional safety. Some urged her to take her time before rushing into decisions she wasn't fully comfortable with. They saw her generosity of spirit, and they saw how deeply she cared, and they feared that one day that warmth might go unreciprocated. Yet Kaylin continued to ground herself in hope. Hope that difficult conversations could lead to growth. Hope that love could prevail over fear. Hope that honesty could heal what was hurting. But every relationship has its balance, its give and its take. Its moments of compassion and moments of scorn. And in their last weeks together, the balance between Kaylin and Donovan shifted in ways that were not visible to the outside world. Quiet, subtle, emotional, and deeply human. Where once there had been shared laughter, there grew a quiet that weighed heavier each day. Where once there had been mutual curiosity, there came reticence and guardedness. Where once there had been warmth, there came a chill no one knew how to warm back up. Kaylin's innocence, her belief that truth and communication could still solve conflict, met with emotional turmoil she could neither fully see nor control. It was this collision, of hope and denial, compassion and fear, innocence and volatility, that set the stage for a meeting that Kaylin hoped would bring clarity, but instead became the final act of her life. To tell the full story of what happened to Kaylin Fiengo, we must step into a very different world, the world of Donovan L. Faison, the man who would ultimately take her life and the life of their unborn child. This isn't an attempt to excuse his actions, but to understand the pressures, fears, and emotional distortions that shaped his decisions, the private turmoil that stood in stark contrast to the public veneer of calm. Donovan Faison was 23 years old at the time of Kaylin's death, several years older than her, a dynamic that, in retrospect, hinted at deeper imbalances in their interactions. What drew Kaylin to him initially was the comfort of companionship. What drew Donovan into her life was something more complicated, a mixture of desire, fear, and personal conflict that would quietly ferment into something far more dangerous. Outside of Kaylin's world of hope and increasing responsibility, Donovan's life was punctuated by stress, unresolved conflict, and an unstable personal situation. He was living with another woman at the time, a relationship that was not just casual, but complicated by distrust and suspicion. According to prosecutors during the trial, that woman suspected him of infidelity, creating pressure that cast a long shadow over every other relationship he had. In his mind, this wasn't simply an argument between two young people. It was a threat, a social threat, a personal insecurity, and a fear of exposure that grew louder the closer he felt it closing in on him. When Kaylin sent him a photo of 2 positive pregnancy tests, the reaction Donovan had in private revealed layers of fear and denial no one had fully seen before. In texts shown at trial, his first response was accusatory, not emotional, not questioning, but a single word filled with agitation: abortion. The starkness of that message wasn't merely a negotiation of choices. It was a moment of collision between what Kaylin hoped for and what Donovan feared, a refusal to accept a future he felt unprepared, unwilling, or unable to confront. Instead of reaching out with concern, instead of grappling with the reality of the situation in a grounded way, his reaction was dominated by pressure and panic. He accused her of lying, not of misunderstanding but of resisting him, and then he directly urged her toward ending the pregnancy. This wasn't a calm negotiation between 2 adults. It was a boiling point, and in Donovan's emotional landscape, fear was rapidly being mistaken for control. Prosecutors in court also introduced further text messages Donovan sent to friends, messages that revealed his inner turmoil and volatility. One such message, "On my brother's grave, I'm gonna crop her out," spoke to a mindset that was shifting dangerously from frustration to fixation, from fear to fixation on erasure rather than resolution. This phrase, chilling in its implication, showed a man who was no longer reasoning with the situation. He was reacting to it with anger and denial. This wasn't simply a disagreement about future plans. This was an emotional ecosystem where fear, insecurity, control, and pressure mixed together, leading him toward a destructive path. His personal stress, compounded by the suspicion of his current partner, his sense of embarrassment, and the fear of responsibility, warped his responses into something far darker than most people could imagine. And so came a choice, or what he framed as a choice. Instead of stepping toward support, toward communication, toward shared responsibility, Donovan made a decision fueled by fear, resentment, and a desperate desire to control what he could no longer understand. He lured Kaylin to Coastline Park, a quiet, out-of-the-way location on the night of November 11, 2022, under the pretense of a discussion. According to prosecutors, Kaylin believed this was another chance to talk, a moment that might bring mutual clarity. But Donovan's intentions that night were hidden beneath a facade of normalcy, his outward calm masking the emotional storm inside him. There was no attempt to seek clarity, no effort to resolve conflict with empathy. There was only an agenda born of fear and control. He didn't just confront her with words, he confronted her with a decision she never signed up to face. In that quiet park, behind gentle streetlights and under the cover of darkness, Donovan's hidden intentions crystallized into something irreversible. His fear of consequence, of exposure, shame, responsibility, and accountability, was no longer just stress. It had become a force that drove him to silence Kaylin forever. This wasn't instinct. This wasn't passion. This was calculation. And that calculation, driven by fear, control, and escalating emotional volatility, ultimately defined the final sequence of events that night. The days leading up to November 11, 2022 were, on the surface, part of an ordinary autumn in Central Florida, crisp nights, long shadows, and the ordinary rhythm of everyday routines. For 18-year-old Kaylin Fiengo, they were filled with ordinary life, difficult decisions, and a blend of hope and unease that any young person navigating adulthood might feel. But beneath that familiar rhythm, an undercurrent of tension was growing, one that would culminate in a moment no one saw coming. In the early November days before her death, Kaylin continued her normal routine, checking in with family and friends, planning for her future, and carrying out small, thoughtful gestures that reflected her warm personality. People close to her didn't notice anything unusual about her behavior outwardly. She was a young woman carrying responsibilities with grace and trying to find balance in a world that often demanded more than it seemed to give. Then came the moment that shifted everything imperceptibly, the moment she told Donovan Faison that she was pregnant by sending him a photo showing 2 positive pregnancy tests. What should have been a personal milestone quickly became the source of conflict. Kaylin messaged Donovan not just with words, but with a truth she had already started to live: she was expecting a child. It was a declaration filled with vulnerability, and in her mind, a step toward honest communication about the future. His reply was abrupt. One word. A reaction without empathy. Abortion. That one message, stark, flippant, cold, was like a crack in the foundation of their dynamic. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't negotiation. It was a dismissal of her autonomy and her perspective. In the hours and days that followed, text messages captured in the subsequent investigation revealed how angry and pressured Donovan felt. Prosecutors presented evidence that at one point he sent a friend a chilling message that read, "On my brother's grave, I'm gonna crop her out." Those words echoed far beyond their dark tone. They suggested a man unraveling under emotional strain and reacting not with support, but with hostility. In the week leading up to November 11th, Kaylin continued to communicate with Donovan, trying to navigate the emotional maze they found themselves in. She hoped for understanding. She hoped for dialogue. She hoped for mutual respect. What she got instead were moments of avoidance, frustration, and pressure masked as conflict. Friends noticed the difference in Donovan's tone, how it shifted from occasional warmth to abrupt demands. Kaylin's messages showed a willingness to find common ground. Donovan's responses, increasingly terse and forceful, revealed a growing fear of responsibility, exposure, and consequence. Her friends later shared that she planned to meet Donovan on the night of November 11th, not with caution, not with fear, but with the hope that a face-to-face conversation could bring clarity. She told a friend where she was going and why. That detail would become crucial in the investigation that followed. By late evening on November 11th, Kaylin was preparing to leave. Her car was packed not with expectation of danger, but with youthful hope of resolution and dialogue. She climbed behind the wheel, unaware that her steps were unfolding into a trap no different from the countless mundane drives most people take during ordinary weeks. The route to Coastline Park was familiar. It was a place Kaylin knew, a public space with wide asphalt lanes and a quiet calm that suggested neutrality, not menace. She likely chose the park because it felt safe, a place for honest conversation rather than conflict. As she drove, the night deepened. Streetlights flickered over pavement. Her thoughts might have wandered between the ordinary and the emotional, between what she hoped the conversation could be and what she feared it might mean. She pulled into the park, reversing into a space, just as she would any meeting held between two people trying to find understanding. Kaylin sat in her vehicle, phone in hand, windows up, heart hopeful not heavy. She waited. Minute by minute, the quiet around her grew heavier. The air felt still. Time at once seemed to stretch thin. She believed Donovan would arrive with words, perhaps regret, clarity, or a renewed attempt at understanding. There was no fear yet. No sense that this moment could be her last. Just resolve, the resolve of someone trying to do what she felt was right. Then came the sound. Footsteps approaching from the darkness. One said at first, then two. We do not know what Kaylin thought in that instant. Only that she turned her head. Only that her eyes fixed on the approaching figure. Only that she believed, even then, that this was a continuation of the conversation they both needed to finish. She reached for her phone. A final message poised between intention and uncertainty. And then the moment snapped, the ordinary snapped into something irreversible. Kaylin Fiengo, a young woman with dreams, plans, and hope for tomorrow, lifted her hand toward her phone one last time. That was her final known action. An action driven not by fear, but by courage. As night gave way to the early hours of November 12, 2022, something felt quietly amiss. What should have been the ordinary conclusion of a late-night meeting never came. Kaylin Fiengo, a young woman full of hope and promise, had not returned home. Her absence was the first ripple in what would become a shockwave across her family, friends, and community. By mid-morning, family members began noticing small but significant discrepancies. Kaylin hadn't answered her phone, a break from her usual consistency. Friends who expected to hear from her did not receive their daily messages. Her mother attempted multiple calls, each one unanswered, each one deepening a sense of unease. It was uncharacteristic. Kaylin had always been reliable, always communicative, and always careful about letting loved ones know her whereabouts. Concern quickly escalated to alarm. Her mother contacted other friends, and soon her circle realized the situation was more serious than a late night. The family contacted local authorities, filing a missing person report. They provided police with the details of her last known movements, the park where she had planned to meet Donovan Faison, the time she was expected home, and the sequence of messages exchanged that night. Law enforcement quickly began questioning those connected to Kaylin. Donovan Faison, the young man she had been communicating with, was identified as her last known contact. Investigators were alerted to the earlier text exchanges, the tension surrounding the pregnancy, and his potentially volatile reaction. Phone records and witness statements revealed Donovan's movements that night. Surveillance footage placed him in the vicinity of Coastline Park around the time Kaylin was last seen. Investigators noted the careful, deliberate nature of his planning, movement patterns that hinted at forethought rather than spontaneous action. Even in these first hours, police began piecing together troubling patterns. Donovan had been seen leaving his residence around the time Kaylin drove to the park. Neighbors reported unusual behavior, including rapid comings and goings, and a noticeable agitation. At the same time, Kaylin's friends provided investigators with messages that demonstrated escalating tension. Her attempt at communication met with his pressure and anger. These red flags painted a picture that something far more serious than a simple disagreement was unfolding. With Donovan identified as a key person of interest, law enforcement began a careful, methodical investigation. Officers secured phone records, traced his steps, and reviewed security footage. Every small detail, a time-stamped message, a parked car in a dark lot, a witness statement, was cataloged. The case began its transition from a disappearance into a homicide investigation, as evidence started to align with troubling possibilities. Authorities were cautious, methodical, and focused on reconstructing what Kaylin's final hours might have looked like. While investigators worked, Kaylin's family and friends waited, hoping for news, fearing the worst. The silence was heavy. The not knowing was almost unbearable. Every unanswered call, every missing text, every empty space in her daily routine became a reminder of her absence, a mounting dread that grew with every passing hour. This is the point where ordinary life intersects with tragedy, where hope begins to collide with suspicion, and where law enforcement must act quickly to prevent time from eroding the truth. When law enforcement first arrived at Coastline Park after Kaylin didn't return home, they were met not with chaos, but with an eerie stillness. A lone vehicle, quiet under a dim streetlight, and a scene that would soon become one of the most painstaking investigations Seminole County had seen. The truth about what happened that night would not reveal itself instantly. It would take hours of methodical work, countless interviews, and the digital footprints left on phones, towers, and cameras to bring clarity to a story that began with hope and ended in tragedy. As patrol units approached the parked car, they immediately cordoned off the area, not knowing yet whether this was a traffic stop gone wrong, a missing person situation, or a homicide. Officers moved with precision, sealing the perimeter, documenting the surroundings, and ensuring no evidence was disturbed. Every detail, from tire prints to footprints, became vitally important. Among the first physical clues discovered was a single bullet casing near the driver's side door. It didn't belong to the environment, it belonged to a crime. Investigators carefully photographed it, logged its location, and collected it for ballistic analysis. This wasn't a random scene. It was deliberate. And the presence of a spent shell would soon become one of the keys to understanding what had transpired. Perhaps the most haunting discovery at the scene was something that spoke not to conflict, but to human hope, an ultrasound image found near Kaylin's body. It was a quiet reminder of the life she was carrying and the deep personal meaning of the situation she was in that night. This image, found at the crime scene, became more than a photo. It became a central piece of evidence that investigators would use to contextualize motive, messaging, and timeline. Once officers secured the vehicle and surrounding area, they confirmed the identity of the woman inside, Kaylin Fiengo, through her identification and belongings. This confirmed to detectives that this was not a disappearance, but a homicide scene requiring an elevated investigative pathway. Detectives immediately secured Kaylin's phone, treating it as one of the most significant pieces of evidence. The device contained the last digital exchanges she had with the person she believed she was meeting, text messages that could reveal emotional tone, intent, and timing. Forensic teams copied the phone's contents, ensuring every message, timestamp, and metadata point would be preserved for analysis. Investigators were about to enter the realm where digital communication became as critical as physical evidence. Early analysis of Kaylin's phone revealed a string of text messages between her and Donovan Faison. These messages showed an emotional arc, from planning the meeting to tension surrounding her pregnancy, and ultimately pointed to a growing conflict between them in the hours leading to her death. The message that became most central to the prosecution's narrative was Donovan's reply of abortion. When Kaylin shared news of her pregnancy, a stark, aggressive response that prosecutors argued demonstrated motive and emotional volatility. With Kaylin's phone establishing the last known conversation, detectives turned their attention to Donovan, seeking his location and movements that evening. Investigators contacted his known associates, checked his calls, and reviewed his statements about what he was doing after Kaylin went missing. His alibi, the timeline and explanation he offered to law enforcement, would later show inconsistencies that drew further scrutiny from detectives. During interviews, law enforcement noted discrepancies between what Donovan initially told officers and what the physical and digital evidence was beginning to reveal. His statements about the timing of his movements, what he knew, or why he might have been at the park did not fully align with the timeline being constructed from phone and location data. These inconsistencies, while subtle at first, became crucial leads in reconstructing exactly where he was and what he was doing that night. To triangulate Donovan's true location, detectives examined cell tower data associated with his phone. This technology allows investigators to determine whether a person's device was in the vicinity of a location at a specific time, not precise to the inch, but precise enough to place him near Coastline Park around the critical moment. The data showed that his device pinged off towers close to the park during the relevant time window, aligning with the moment Kaylin arrived and awaited his arrival, a chilling confirmation that Donovan was indeed present near the scene when the murder occurred. With location data and phone records pointing toward Donovan's presence near the scene, detectives turned to other sources of visual evidence, surveillance cameras, both public and private. These included traffic cams along roads leading to the park, nearby business cameras, doorbell or home security systems in the surrounding area. While not every camera captured useful footage, enough visuals helped establish patterns of movement that aligned Donovan's path with the timeline of Kaylin's arrival and disappearance. In the digital age, a person's online activity can be as revealing as physical evidence. Investigators collected data including recent searches, location logs from messaging apps, call histories, time logs from cell phone providers. Each data point contributed to the mosaic of Donovan's behavior before and after the homicide. Everything from the timing of his last text to the routing of his GPS was scrutinized, building a nearly continuous picture of his movements and intentions. Armed with phone records, text messages, location data, and inconsistencies in Donovan's statements, detectives moved forward in their investigation. They located Donovan, brought him in for more extensive questioning, and presented evidence that challenged his earlier account of events, pressing him on timelines, text messages, and his actions near the park that night. This wasn't a dramatic arrest. It was the quiet culmination of precise detective work, systematic, meticulous, informed by layers of collected data. The breakthrough came not from a single piece of evidence, but from the convergence of multiple investigative tracks. The location data placing his phone near Coastline Park. The text messages showing motive and escalating tension. The ballistic evidence establishing a shooting occurred. The ultrasound photo found at the scene. The inconsistencies in his statements under scrutiny. Together, These elements created a compelling narrative that investigators were able to present to prosecutors, evidence that linked Donovan Faison directly to the murder of Kaylin and her unborn child. By combining physical evidence, digital trails, and inconsistencies in his account, law enforcement built a case that would ultimately lead to his arrest roughly 10 months after the killing. What started as a missing person inquiry rapidly evolved into a homicide investigation marked by patient, methodical detective work. Officers didn't rush to judgment. They followed evidence. They documented every detail. And in the end, that careful approach unearthed the truth about what happened that night. Truth that would be pivotal in court, truth that provided answers for a grieving family, and truth that laid the foundation for justice. Once law enforcement had secured the scene and collected evidence, the next step was to understand the medical and forensic reality of what had occurred. The Seminole County Medical Examiner's Office conducted a careful, meticulous examination, aiming to determine the cause of death, the timeline of injury, and any details that could clarify the tragic events of November 11, 2022. Kaylin Fiengo was pronounced deceased at the scene. The autopsy determined that she had suffered a gunshot wound, which was the cause of death. The medical examiner noted the wound as consistent with close-range discharge, providing investigators with crucial information to reconstruct the events that night. The examination was conducted with precision and care, focusing entirely on factual reporting rather than graphic imagery. This approach allowed investigators, prosecutors, and the family to understand what happened without unnecessary dramatization. During the autopsy and scene processing, the ultrasound image found near Kaylin was documented. It became a significant forensic artifact, linking motive, pre-existing conversations, and the emotional context surrounding the crime. While not physically contributing to cause of death, it represented the personal and human stakes involved. A life that was developing, a future that was interrupted. Forensic analysis helped investigators verify the timeline established from phone records, messages, and eyewitness reports. By cross-referencing the time of death with text timestamps, cell tower data, and surveillance footage, the medical examiner's findings supported law enforcement's reconstruction of Donovan Faison's actions and Kaylin's final hours. Throughout the autopsy report, care was taken to present the findings ethically and factually. The purpose was to provide clarity to law enforcement and the judicial process, not to shock or sensationalize. The examination revealed injuries consistent with forensic expectations given the evidence collected, confirming the deliberate nature of the crime. The forensic findings provided a crucial bridge between evidence and prosecution, confirmed that a gunshot caused death, validated timelines suggested by phone data and surveillance, supported the connection between Donovan Faison and the scene, reinforced the seriousness and premeditated nature of the act. This combination of forensic precision and methodical investigation gave prosecutors the foundation needed to move toward charges and court proceedings. Even as forensic findings were clinical, they also reminded everyone involved of the human life lost. Kaylin was not just a set of data points or injuries, she was an 18-year-old young woman with hopes, dreams, and family. Every measured detail in the autopsy underscored the gravity of the situation and the need for justice, without ever depicting violence unnecessarily. After months of meticulous investigation, law enforcement had gathered the evidence needed to confront Donovan Faison. The culmination of physical evidence, digital footprints, text messages, and witness statements painted a clear, troubling picture. It was no longer a question of what happened. It was time to act. In the early hours, Donovan was located and taken into custody without incident. He was read his rights, informed of the charges, and escorted by officers to the Seminole County Detention Facility. The arrest was quiet yet monumental, the first step toward accountability in a case that had shaken the community. Donovan Faison was formally charged with first-degree murder of Kaylin Fiengo, homicide of an unborn child. Additional charges related to premeditation and intent. These charges reflected both the severity of the act and the premeditated nature of the crime, as established by investigators' careful reconstruction of the events and supporting evidence. At his first court appearance, Donovan appeared in a formal setting, facing the charges with a stoic demeanor. The courtroom was filled with tension, family, friends, and community members present, each grappling with grief and the weight of justice about to unfold. The judge outlined the charges, discussed bail considerations, and scheduled future proceedings. For the family of Kaylin Fiengo, it was a solemn confirmation that the legal system had begun moving forward. Prosecutors presented a clear narrative. Donovan Faison had lured Kaylin under false pretenses, acted with premeditation, and carried out an intentional act that ended her life. They highlighted the key pieces of evidence. The text messages showing escalating tension. Location data placing him at Coastline Park. Physical evidence from the scene. Inconsistencies in his statements. Their goal was to present the case with clarity, focusing on facts, motive, and opportunity. The defense aimed to challenge elements of the prosecution's timeline and evidence interpretation. While maintaining professionalism, they questioned the precision of location tracking, interpretation of text messages, reliability of witness statements. Despite these efforts, the overwhelming convergence of digital, physical, and testimonial evidence made a compelling argument against Donovan Faison. During the initial hearings, the judge denied bail, citing the severity of the charges and the risk posed to the community. This decision ensured that Donovan remained in custody while prosecutors prepared for trial. Family members were allowed to read impact statements, reflections on Kaylin's life, her hopes, her innocence, and the void left by her absence. Each word carried the weight of grief, and for those in the courtroom, it was a powerful reminder that the trial was not about abstraction, but about a young life ended too soon. Friends recalled her laughter, her dreams, and her gentle spirit. Their statements were factual yet emotional, offering glimpses into the person behind the headlines. As the case moved forward, Donovan Faison awaited trial. Investigators, prosecutors, and legal teams continued to prepare, ensuring the evidence was organized, verified, and ready for presentation before the court. The community, while still grieving, found some measure of reassurance in the careful and thorough legal process underway. The shock of Kaylin Fiengo's death reverberated far beyond Coastline Park. In homes, schools, and workplaces across Seminole County, friends, neighbors, and family grappled with the sudden loss of a young life, one filled with hope, dreams, and potential. Grief settled into the hearts of those closest to her, an ache that was both immediate and enduring. Kaylin's absence left a quiet, persistent void, a reminder of what was lost and what could never be reclaimed. Kaylin's parents described her as their sunshine, full of laughter, curiosity, and love. Every corner of their home held memories of her. Childhood toys, high school memorabilia, and personal mementos that spoke to her presence even in absence. Her siblings spoke of a sister who was protective, caring, and deeply invested in family. Each conversation, each reminiscence, carried the weight of grief and the quiet longing for what could have been. Friends remembered Kaylin for her warmth, her ability to make anyone feel valued, and her bright, unshakable optimism. Teachers recalled a student who approached challenges with determination and kindness. Every recollection emphasized her unique spirit, the kind that leaves a lasting imprint on those around her. Her social circle shared stories of late-night chats, weekend gatherings, and small acts of generosity, moments that, in hindsight, seemed even more precious. The community responded with shock, compassion, and support. Local organizations offered condolences, counselors were made available at schools, and neighbors came together to light candles, hold vigils, and commemorate Kaylin's life. This collective response reflected the understanding that while the act was isolated, its emotional impact was far-reaching. The community, united in grief, sought ways to honor her memory and support her family. In the weeks following her death, memorials emerged. Candles and flowers left at Coastline Park. Messages written on cards and posters by classmates. Online tributes celebrating her life, passions, and dreams. These acts of remembrance were small yet powerful gestures, ways to ensure that Kaylin's life was remembered not only for its tragic end but for the light she brought into the world. The loss of Kaylin created lasting emotional consequences for her family and friends. Therapy sessions, counseling, and support groups became vital tools for processing grief. The community grappled with the knowledge that life can change in an instant, and that vigilance, care, and empathy are essential in the wake of tragedy. Even as healing began, the memories of her laughter, her kindness, and her aspirations remained, a reminder of what had been taken too soon. Kaylin's legacy extended beyond the sorrow of her death. She inspired conversations about responsibility, communication, and the importance of protecting and valuing young lives. Her story prompted awareness around young women navigating relationships, the risks of coercion and emotional manipulation, community vigilance and support systems. In remembering Kaylin, her family and friends ensured that her life, her hopes, dreams, and love would continue to resonate, offering lessons and compassion for those who followed. Kaylin Fiengo's life, though tragically cut short, left an enduring impression on everyone who knew her. She was more than the victim of a crime. She was a young woman with dreams, ambitions, and a spirit that radiated warmth and kindness. Her plans for the future were bright and intentional. At just 18, she envisioned building a life filled with love, creativity, and connection. She dreamed of nurturing a family, pursuing meaningful relationships, and embracing the joys and responsibilities of adulthood with optimism. Every conversation with her revealed hope, determination, and a desire to make a positive impact on those around her. Family and friends often spoke of her kindness, generosity, and gentle presence. She had a way of making people feel seen, valued, and heard. From small acts of thoughtfulness to her unwavering support of friends and family, Kaylin left behind countless memories of care and compassion. Her personality was radiant, light-hearted yet empathetic, strong yet tender. These qualities endeared her to everyone she met and remain central to how she is remembered today. Even amid challenges, Kaylin approached life with optimism. She carefully considered her next steps, her education, her relationships, and her dreams of motherhood. She was planning for a future that reflected both responsibility and joy, a future now never realized, yet honored in memory. Her story serves as a reminder that even brief lives can leave lasting imprints, that every choice, every dream, every act of kindness contributes to the world around us. Kaylin's story resonates beyond her immediate circle. It encourages awareness of emotional manipulation, coercion, and hidden conflict. It prompts conversations about empathy, communication, and the importance of valuing life at every stage. Even in tragedy, her experience inspires vigilance, compassion, and protective action for those at risk. Her life, though short, became a catalyst for dialogue and awareness, a legacy of human dignity and care. The story of Kaylin Fiengo is a reminder of the cost of hidden emotional turmoil. It reflects the tragedy that can unfold when fear, control, and unspoken conflict go unnoticed. Her life teaches us the importance of communication, awareness, and compassion, the need to listen, to intervene when someone is at risk, and to honor the humanity in everyone, especially those most vulnerable. Above all, her story reminds us that Kaylin was not just a headline. She was a young woman with dreams, a bright spirit, and a legacy that continues to inspire even in the face of loss. Her story reminds us that every life has value, every voice deserves safety, and every moment of silence can carry a deeper truth. If you want to help share Kaylin's story, please like, subscribe, and share. Tell us in the comments, what stood out most to you? Encourage respectful discussion, empathy, and community awareness.